Most people don't remember the moment they made the decision that changed everything. Not because it wasn't important, because at the time, it didn't feel like anything dramatic was happening. It felt like a small, quiet, slightly inconvenient choice, the kind that doesn't announce itself as significant until years later, when you look back and realize that one unremarkable moment quietly separated two completely different futures. That's how the best financial decisions work. They don't feel like turning points. They feel like paperwork. They feel like saying no to something you wanted. They feel like setting up an automatic transfer that makes your account balance slightly uncomfortable for a few days. And then time passes, and the math starts to show. And eventually, the distance between where you are and where you would have been becomes impossible to ignore. Here are 7 of them. Decision 1. Starting to invest before you feel ready. There is a specific thought pattern that delays this decision for most people. It sounds like, I'll start investing once I have more to invest, once the debt is handled, once the salary goes up, once I understand it better, once things settle down. The problem is that none of those conditions arrive cleanly, and while they're being waited for, time, the only thing that makes investing work, is passing. Financial literacy research shows that most people reach peak financial decision-making in their 50s, but the habits that produce the best outcomes are formed in the 20s and 30s. The gap between those two facts is the entire argument for starting early. Here's what the numbers say concretely. $200 invested monthly starting at 22 at an 8% average annual return becomes approximately $1.1 million by age 65. The same $200 monthly starting at 32 becomes approximately $490,000. Same contribution, same return rate, same discipline. A 10-year delay costs $610,000. Not because the person who waited did something wrong, because the person who started early did one thing right, and then let time do the rest. Morgan Housel, in The Psychology of Money, made an observation worth sitting with. The single most powerful variable in long-term wealth building is not return rate, not income, not investment selection. It's time in the market. And time is the one resource that cannot be recovered once it's passed. The feeling of not being ready is permanent if you wait for it to go away on its own. The decision to start anyway, with whatever amount is available, in whatever account is accessible, is the one that makes the feeling irrelevant. Decision 2. Building an emergency fund before you need it. 85% of Americans say maintaining a high credit score is crucial to financial well-being. But the foundation that makes everything else stable gets far less attention. The emergency fund isn't exciting. It doesn't compound into anything. It just sits there, earning modest interest, waiting for a problem to arrive. And that's exactly what makes it one of the most valuable decisions you can make early. Here's what happens without one. A $1,200 car repair becomes a credit card balance. That balance carries interest. The interest compounds. The monthly payment competes with the investment contribution. The investment contribution gets reduced or skipped. The compounding that was supposed to happen doesn't. A single, unexpected expense has now disrupted a system that was built to run quietly in the background, and the disruption costs far more than the original expense. The emergency fund doesn't grow wealth. It protects the conditions under which wealth grows. It converts potential crises into manageable inconveniences. And it changes how every other financial decision feels, because decisions made from stability look fundamentally different from decisions made from pressure. 3 to 6 months of expenses is the standard benchmark. The amount matters less than the principle. Something is there when the unexpected arrives. And the unexpected always arrives. Decision 3. Deciding what enough looks like before income rises. This is the decision most people never make explicitly, and that absence costs them more than they realize. Many people in long-term financial surveys said the best financial decision they'd ever made was to live below their means and stay out of debt. Specifically, they were glad they'd managed to live within their income early in life. The mechanism behind this is simple. When income rises and lifestyle rises proportionally to match it, the gap between what comes in and what the life costs to maintain stays flat. Savings stay flat. Investment capacity stays flat. The person earns more but builds nothing. Additional. Every raise disappears into a higher standard of normal before it can accumulate into something durable. The person who defines enough early not as a permanent ceiling, but as a reference point, has a different experience. When income rises, the reference point doesn't move automatically. Some of the increase gets allocated before lifestyle can absorb it. The gap widens instead of closing. And that gap is the only place wealth actually accumulates. Kiyosaki described this as the difference between assets and liabilities, not just in what you own, but in how you think about income itself. The person who routes new income into assets before lifestyle consumes it is operating on a fundamentally different financial architecture than the person who upgrades first and saves whatever remains. There is almost never anything remaining. Decision 4. Understanding how compound interest works against you before it's too late. Most people learn about compound interest as something that works in their favor. The index fund grows. The retirement account compounds. The returns generate returns. It's one of the most reliable mathematical phenomena in personal finance. What gets less attention is that the same mechanism runs in reverse on debt. A credit card balance at 24% annual interest, left unpaid for 5 years, doesn't just cost 120% of the original amount. It compounds. The interest accrues on the growing balance, not just the original one. A $5,000 balance at 24%, minimum payments only, takes over 20 years to pay off and costs more than $15,000 in total. The decision to understand this early, before the first credit card, before the first manageable monthly payment, changes the entire relationship with debt. Not because debt is never useful, because the difference between debt that creates something and debt that consumes everything lies in understanding the math before signing. 81% of Americans say it's important to pay off credit cards rather than carry a balance. Most of them learned this the expensive way. The decision to learn it early, before the balance exists, costs nothing. Decision 5. Automating savings before spending decisions are made. There is a version of saving that depends on willpower. Every month, after the bills are paid and the expenses are covered and the discretionary spending happens, whatever remains gets put aside. This version almost never works. Not because the person lacks discipline, but because the remainder is almost always smaller than intended, and often zero. The version that works flips the sequence. A fixed amount leaves the account first, before anything else happens. Lifestyle adjusts to what remains. The decision was made once, in a clear-headed moment, and now runs automatically, without requiring a monthly act of restraint. Vanguard research found that automation increases long-term savings rates by over 40% compared to manual saving. Not because automated savers are more disciplined, because they removed the decision from a moment of competing priorities and placed it in a structural system that operates regardless of mood, stress, or temptation. The decision to automate before lifestyle has fully expanded is the most valuable version of this. Once lifestyle expands to consume all available income, reversing it requires genuine sacrifice. Before that expansion, the automation simply defines the boundary before it forms. That single structural choice, make the allocation first, live on what remains, is one of the clearest separators between people who build wealth and people who earn well without accumulating anything. Decision 6. Buying time back earlier than feels necessary. This one is different from the others. It's not about a financial instrument or a savings rate. It's about a reorientation in what money is actually for. At some point in the wealth-building process, a shift happens in how the most financially secure people think about their resources. It stops being about accumulation and starts being about optionality. The ability to say no to things that don't serve them. The ability to take time off without it triggering a financial crisis. The ability to work on something that matters instead of something that pays. Naval Ravikant captured the principle directly. The goal of financial independence is not to stop working. It is to stop being forced to work. The distinction is everything. The person working because they choose to operates differently from the person working because they have to. They make different decisions. They tolerate different things. They have access to a completely different quality of daily life. The decision to orient financial choices toward this outcome, earlier than it feels necessary, before the urgency of needing it arrives, changes what gets prioritized. The upgrade that would have been purchased gets skipped. The investment that would have been delayed gets made. Not because of deprivation, but because the destination is clear and every choice is evaluated against it. The people who never make this reorientation often arrive at retirement with resources they built without ever understanding why they were building them. The people who make it early build with intention and arrive with both the resources and the clarity to use them. Decision 7. Learning to be comfortable being financially invisible. This is the quietest decision on the list, and possibly the most consequential over a long enough timeline. There is real social pressure, continuous, ambient, invisible as air, to demonstrate financial progress through visible signals. The car, the apartment, the vacation, the wardrobe, the restaurant. All of it communicates something. All of it carries a cost, and none of it compounds. Research in happiness economics suggests that spending money on experiences brings more lasting happiness than spending it on possessions. But the social pressure operates on possessions, not experiences. The pressure is to be seen progressing, not to actually progress. The decision to become comfortable with financial invisibility, to let the investment account grow without announcing it, to drive the adequate car without apologizing for it, to skip the upgrade that would require financing, is not a sacrifice. It's a reallocation. Every dollar not spent on visible progress is a dollar building invisible optionality. The Millionaire Next Door documented this pattern exhaustively. The people who built the most significant net worth on ordinary incomes shared one consistent behavior. They were largely indifferent to the visible spending of people around them. They weren't performing restraint. They simply didn't need the external confirmation that the visible purchases were designed to provide. That indifference, learned early, before the social comparison becomes habitual, is one of the most powerful financial assets a person can develop. It doesn't show up on a balance sheet, but over 20 years, it shows up everywhere else. These 7 decisions share something. None of them require exceptional income. None of them require financial expertise. None of them require a dramatic overhaul of how you're living. They require a specific kind of clarity about what money is for, what time does to money, and what happens when the two are aligned early instead of corrected late. The people who make these decisions in their 20s and 30s don't remember them as turning points. They remember them as inconveniences, as the slightly uncomfortable choice that didn't feel like much at the time. They only see the distance when they look back. And by then, the distance is the whole point.